Yeah, peeps, here we go. We're now graphing functions, parabolas, of the form y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So in previous videos, if you haven't already watched them or you don't understand yet, please work through the videos that go over how to graph ax squared and ax squared plus c. If you're good on those, we've now graduated to this form. And here's the great news. You don't do anything different. We're just going to sit back, use our understanding from before, and notice the beauty of how these graphs of these quadratic equations come out. So we're going to do two in this video just to get experience. Let's rock and roll. So first things first, I always start out by finding my vertex and my axis of symmetry. And that comes from the formulas we've seen in previous videos from the opposite of b over 2a. That formula will be explained later in quadratic formulas. It's very cool. So the opposite of b over 2a, well now b is -6, right? That's this term right here. A is 3 and then c is 1. So the opposite of -6 is what we're doing here, all over 2 times a, which is 3. The opposite of -6 is going to be 6. Sweet. All over 2 times 3, which is 6. Nice. So we've got x equals 1. So what that means is our axis of symmetry is the line x equals 1. This is a departure from what we've seen in previous videos. We've got a mirror or an axis of symmetry that is moved over. It's not on the y-axis. What was different between this function and the other ones you've done? We have a b value. That b value causes horizontal shifts. Very, very cool stuff. So as always, I draw in what I find as I find it. It helps me to understand what I'm doing as I'm doing it. I suggest you do it that way too, rather than doing it all out, then graphing it. Now we want to find the vertex. So to find the y value of the vertex, we already have the x value. I plug this x value into the function, no different than before. So the y value of the vertex will be 3 times x squared, so it's 3 times 1 squared, minus 6 times 1, using this function, plus 1. Now just do your order of operations, take your time, or if you're lucky to use a calculator, you can do that. But try to do it mentally, please. 1 squared is 1, times 3 is 3, minus 6 times 1, so that's going to be 3 minus 6 plus 1. 3 minus 6 is -3, plus 1 is -2. So what that means is we input into this 1, and we got an output of -2. So our vertex is 1, -2. So I'm going to do that in a different color now. So that's 1, -2. Bam. Now, we know the a value is greater than 0. So we already knew this graph was going to be facing up. So this, since it's facing up, it's happening down here, is a minimum. So if your teacher just asks you the question, what's the vertex and is it a minimum or maximum? You can just generalize, I know it's facing up, a is more than 0. So I know how to find my vertex, and therefore it's a minimum. It happens right there. And you can just stop the problem there. But we're not going to stop there. We're going to keep graphing. Just like in previous videos, we are going to plot two x values to the right or to the left. So I'm going to plug in, just for giggles, two x values to the left and then mirror them. You could easily pick 2 and 3 and pick two values to the right. Just don't pick one value on one side and one on the other so that we're consistent with our mirroring. It makes it so we don't waste time, that's all. So I'm going to erase that y. I'm going to plug in x equals 0, and then I'll plug in x equals -1. They're the two x values immediately to the left of my axis of symmetry. So plugging in 0, I get y equals 3 times 0 squared minus 6 times 0 plus 1. And reminder, I'm plugging it into our function. That simplifies to, well, 0 squared is 0 times 3 is 0. 6 times 0 is 0. So I get 0 minus 0 is 0, plus 1 is 0. So my input was 0, and my output is 0. Great. So one of my points is 0, 0. I'm going to mirror it. It's 1 away from the mirror, so it's going to be 1 away on the other side. Now I'm going to plug in -1. So I've got y equals 3 times -1 squared minus 6 times -1 plus 1. And we'll figure out what that equals. Now, there's a word to the wise here. If you're using a calculator, make sure to use parentheses so that it doesn't square the -1 but leave out the negative. Because when you square -1, -1 times -1 is +1. So we get 3 times +1. -6 times -1 is +6 plus 1. So the signs matter a lot. And now we get 3. 3 times 1 is 3. Plus 6 is 9, plus 1 is 10. So we input -1 and we got out a value of 10. So that's -1 all the way up 10. And then that's 1, 2 away from the mirror, the axis. So 1, 2 away from the axis. And look at that, we got our 5 points. So plot it all the way down, pretty steep. Ooh, not my best parabola, but close. Doesn't have that little hitch in it normally. It's nice U-shaped. Now, the important parts here to understand is that it's the same process as what we did in previous videos, just has a B term, and it does a horizontal shift. So it gives us a little more spice to finding our vertex. Very, very cool. Again, you could look at this beforehand though, know it's facing up, A is greater than 0, therefore know that we have the minimum, and find the vertex. All right, I got one more left to do with you. It's f of x equals minus x squared plus 4x plus 1. Let's rock and roll with it. So how do we do this? The same way we've been doing them. Let's find our axis of symmetry and the x value of our vertex, right? That's going to be from the formula x equals the opposite of b, all over 2 times a. Well, let's identify what b is. B is 4. It's right here. So that's the opposite of b, all over 2 times a. A is technically 1, -1. So 2 times -1. That's -4 all over -2, which is 2, because 2 times -1 is -2. So that's my x value. My axis of symmetry, therefore, is the equation x equals 2. So again, let's plot that, right? We definitely want to put that down here, because if we don't, we will be skipping an important step. I like to, again, show everything as I do it. So now that I have x equals 2, I'm going to plug that into f, and that is going to give me my y value. So f of -2, well, that's going to be minus -2 squared plus 4 times -2 minus 1. Now from here, all I did was plug in -2. Just be very careful with your signs, especially with the calculator. Use those parentheses. I'm going to find my y value, my vertex. -2 squared is 4, so I get the opposite of 4. That is that opposite sign. 4 times -2 is -8. It's positive times the negative. And then minus 1. So that's going to be -4 minus 8 is -12 minus 1 is -13. Oh boy. How are we going to do that one? Our input was -2, our output was -13. That's going to be just off the graph. Ugh. So if it's just off the graph, that's going to be -2, -13. This is going to be an interesting graph, peeps. Sorry, +2, -13. What am I doing? -2. +2. So I made an error here. Oh my word. What do we do? Well, we got to erase that error. So my error came right here. I should have plugged in +2. I got a little ahead of myself. So even errors with me end up happening. And I'm glad it did, because now I'm going to show you how to check that we were wrong. That's why I put my axis of symmetry in there first. Because when I went to plot this, I thought, wait a second. I don't have an x value at -2, not on my vertex. It's +2. And when I plug in +2, I'm going to get different numbers. I'll get -2 squared, that's -4. 4 times 2 is +8, which will change this number. -4 plus 8 is 4, minus 1 is 3. So I went back and checked it. My input is +2. +3 is my output. Whew! I'm glad I made the error, because now you see why you should graph as you go, so that things make sense. You'll catch errors like that. So 2, 3 is my vertex. It is going to be a maximum because we have an a value that's negative, so this thing's facing down. So we have a maximum. Sweet! So we're going to plug in 2 values. I'll plug 2 to the left again because they're easier and smaller numbers, or you could pick 3 and 4. It does not matter. I'm going to do f of 1, this x value right to the left of the axis, and f of 0. Okay, here we go. The opposite of x squared is the opposite of 1 squared plus 4 times 1 minus 1. 4 times 1 right here. That's equal to 1 squared is 1 times a negative. It's -1. So it's going to be -1 plus 4 times 1 is 4 minus 1. -1 and 4 is +3 minus 1 is 2. So my input was 1, my output is 2. Let's plot it. 1, 2. Mirror. 1 away on both sides. And now f of 0, the easiest one to plug in. That's going to be the opposite of 0 squared plus 4 times 0. It's more fun to modulate. Change your voice up, isn't it? So 0 squared is 0. The opposite of that is 0. Plus 4 times 0 is still 0. All that's 0. So I got 0 minus 1, which is -1. So my input was 0. My output was -1. So I've got the point 0, -1. That's 1, 2 away from the axis. 1, 2 on the other side. And there we have our parabola, as expected, facing down. You already knew that right here. and not too wide and not too narrow. There we have it, folks. Again, follow the steps, find your axis, your vertex, and whenever you have x values, for the love of math, plug them in to find your y values. That's how functions work. Inputs beget outputs. They give you outputs in normal language. See you next time.